Many years ago, I heard the famous author and psychiatrist M. Scott Peck say in a lecture that if you need therapy but you can't afford it, pretend that you're an alcoholic and go to Alcoholics Anonymous meetings. It is actually pretty good advice. AA literature is the best distillation of psychological insight and treatment that you're going to find anywhere. It isn't perfect, and clinicians often argue with their methods and conclusions, but there's a lot of wisdom collected through their decades of experience that we find in their literature. One of my favorite passages in AA's big book is found on page 66, where it says, "If we were to live, we had to be free of anger. The grouch and the brainstorm were not for us. They may be the dubious luxury of normal men, but for alcoholics, these things are poison." I love that phrase that calls anger a dubious luxury. There are things to be angry about: injustice, racism, poverty, hunger, war, and the media's obsession over Taylor Swift and the football player she's dating. But as a product of the patriarchal South myself, I can tell you that anger was sharpened into being the only emotion allowed to men in almost any situation. We certainly weren't supposed to cry. We couldn't be too sad or depressed. We couldn't be too worried. And we certainly couldn't be scared. But we proved our masculinity by being angry. I can remember it as if it was yesterday. Nearly 40 years ago, my father and I took a trip to visit my uncle, my father's eldest brother, who was near death. Presley was a kind old bachelor who lived in a little house on a lake near Chicago, where he kept an immaculate home and well-tended flower and vegetable gardens. But this visit was marked by chaos. Presley was wasting away from all of the side effects of diabetes. His clothes hung on his withered body. He was unshaven, and his hair and fingernails had become long. My father saw the same thing I saw, and he became very angry. He was angry at the cleaning lady who had not polished the silver or properly cleared the cobwebs from the house. He was mad at the neighbor's son who was sloppy in his job of mowing the lawn and weeding the gardens. He was mad at the visiting nurse because it was obvious that Presley was dying and she hadn't done anything to stop it. What I was able to finally see in my father was not his anger, but his fear. His fear of mortality, his fear of losing what was a father figure to him, fear that he couldn't do anything about it. What I was able to see was a nurse, a cleaning lady, and even the teenage neighbor had all realized that Presley was fundamentally lonely and he was dying alone. So when they came to his house, they spent time sitting in the lawn chair just listening to him. They listened to his stories about his years on the farm in Kentucky, about his decades of work in the steel industry, about his late wife, but about his vineyard, his church, his friends, because it was time to let the silver tarnish and to allow the weeds to have their way with the garden. It was time to slow down, sit in a chair, and listen to a dying man talk about his life. When Presley died, his minister came to talk to Dad and me the way that ministers always do when an old church member dies. He had only known Presley as a sick old man who was rarely able to attend church. And so he asked my father and me to tell him about his church member. My dad stuttered and shook and just said that he didn't know what to say. His mind was so clouded by fear and anger that he couldn't even describe the person in the world that he loved the most. Presley was the only one of 9 children who never had children of his own, so he lavished patriarchal attention on his nieces and nephews. I told the minister a lot that in my childhood, if I got to eat in a restaurant, it was because Uncle Presley was visiting and he paid. If I got a nice present on Christmas, it was because he sent it. He noticed potential in me that other people didn't see. So he sent me books. He sent me a subscription to National Geographic for the last 20 years of his life, so that we could talk on the phone about the places it described. We exchanged photos of the birds at our bird feeders and talked about the migratory patterns of songbirds. He was the one who took me to art museums, to the Chicago Adler Planetarium. My father undoubtedly had many more profound memories that he simply couldn't articulate because, well, just to say it very plainly, anger makes a person stupid. Anger, the big book says, is a dubious luxury. I've been angry about things lately. I've been angry about the repeal of Roe v. Wade and its protection of women's reproductive self-control. I am angry about the thousands of immigrant children who were kept in cages to punish their parents for daring to flee violence and hunger in order to give their children a better life. And paradoxically, I'm angry about Israel's history of oppression of Palestinians, and I'm even more angry about the terrorist attacks against Israel by Hamas, Hezbollah, and whoever Iran is arming now. But I don't want to waste anger on the drivers at the intersection who get so lost in their cell phones that they forget to drive when the light turns green. I don't want to waste my energy on being angry at the server who gets so caught up in conversations back in the kitchen that they forget to come back to the table and actually refill my iced tea. I don't want to be angry about having to wait in line at the pharmacy or at the Department of Motor Vehicles or at McDonald's when someone ahead of me is staring at the menu board as if they've never had a hamburger before. This topic came to mind lately as the media gave nearly constant coverage to the caucuses in Iowa and the primary in New Hampshire. Over and over again, interviews asked voters who they were going to vote for or who they just voted for. And you know, most of them did favor Donald Trump, and many of them said something to the effect, well, you know, I believe he had been a good president, so I'd like to have him back in office. They obviously weren't interviewing people who were on their way out of the monthly Mensa Club meeting, but they looked normal enough, the kind of people you see at the grocery store or in line in any public service. But they were just casually referencing Donald Trump as having been a good president. And I'm entirely sincere here when I tell you that I have no idea what they're talking about. And I'll tell you, after moving to Florida, I found a nearby coffee shop where I like to sit and study, but the owner kept coming over to my table and asking me what I was working on. And this past week, when I told her that I was working on a sermon about grievance and the MAGA voters, she and her sister became unglued in stereo. They both insisted that they were not Trump supporters because they were angry about anything, but because Joe Biden is so evil. They insisted that he is giving the country away to China, though they couldn't give a single example of what they were talking about. And that he was turning America into a socialist country, again, with no examples of encroaching socialism. I know Joe Biden is old, but public schools, police forces, fire departments, the Army, the Air Force, the Navy, all of which are socialist institutions, none of them were his idea. It's true that Biden is old. It's also true that he isn't the smartest man to ever occupy the Oval Office. He is not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Folks, he may not be the sharpest spoon in the drawer. He graduated near the bottom of his law school class, but I'll say this for him. He graduated on his own rather than having his sister write all of his papers for him, which, as we have learned from his sister, is how Trump managed to get through college. He isn't an Einstein, he isn't a Kennedy or an Obama, but you just can't say that he's evil. He's a nice old guy who has a big heart, who probably should have never run for president. But this is how our nominating system works, or more accurately, this is how our nominating system doesn't work. Still, as one friend recently said to me, Biden would be a better president as a cadaver than Trump would ever be. And that, in my estimation, is not hyperbole. It is a fact. But let me not go on an MSNBC-style rant. What do the people who worked the most closely with Donald Trump say about him? The Republicans who worked next to him in his administration. General John Kelly, the former director of Homeland Security, who was handpicked by Trump to serve as his chief of staff to bring stability to the White House. He left in 2020 saying, "The depths of Trump's dishonesty is astounding to me. The dishonesty, the transactional nature of every relationship, though it is more pathetic than anything else. He is the most flawed person I have ever met in my life." His Attorney General, Bill Barr, after defending him against all comers for years, finally broke ranks with him over the theft of nuclear secrets and other classified documents. Barr also said that Trump is a fundamentally flawed person who engaged in reckless conduct. He has no right to those documents. Barr said the government tried for over a year, quietly and with respect, to get them back, which was essential that they do, and he jerked them around. His first Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, said, "Trump's understanding of global events, his understanding of global history, his understanding of U.S. history was really limited." It's really hard to have a conversation with someone who doesn't even understand the concept for why we're talking about this. Of course, after a private conversation trying to explain NATO to Trump, Tillerson famously left the Oval Office muttering that Trump was an effing moron. Mark Esper, the former Secretary of Defense, said, "I think he's unfit for office. He puts himself before country. His actions are all about him and not about the country. And then, of course, I believe he has integrity and character issues as well." In a recent article, CNN lists 24 former administration members that go from the former vice president to a 20-something aide to the chief of staff, who said that Trump is unfit to hold office again. This is not a matter of me being a liberal. This is what Republicans who worked for Trump say about him. These are just obvious and indisputable facts, without even wandering in to talk about his personal stuff, about his public statements about wishing that he could date his daughter, the dozens of women who have accused him of sexual assault, his recent trial that involved both rape and defamation of character, and the more than 90 indictments against him for voter fraud, tax cheating schemes, and insurrection against the government of the United States, of which he was the elected head. All of which, my former friend at the local coffee shop says, are fake allegations, even the ones where we have video and audio tapes of Donald Trump committing the crimes for which he's charged. I think that the Georgia journalist Jay Bookman put my feelings into words when he said, "For me personally, the most painful aspect of his rise has been the damage it has caused to my faith in my fellow Americans. I do not understand how a person can watch what he says and does and still believe that he belongs in the Oval Office." The issue is this: can we discern what the attraction of Donald Trump is that has a sweet little old lady leaving a New Hampshire polling place saying, "I don't like how he runs his mouth, but I think he is a good president"? Like Cornel West, the Union Seminary professor who said on Bill Maher's show in 2020, "How can, in a country of more than 300 million people, we end up with Joe Biden and Donald Trump as our candidates for president?" And now he is so disgusted with the fact that we're going to end up with the same choice in 2024 that West is running for president himself. I don't like that, but I do think he has a point. These are two horrible candidates. It's just that in any fair analysis, one is 1,000 times more horrible than the other one. Seriously, if we were given a choice between Donald Trump or Charles Manson, I'm afraid I would still have to vote for Charles Manson. At least Manson's been dead for 7 years and he isn't able to do much more harm. Trump is dangerous to democracy. He's dangerous to the global economy. He is a friend to every dictator and tyrant in the world. And yet about half of Americans are poised to vote for him again. What, we all wonder, is the draw to this man? It's too easy to say that MAGA America is a cult. Even a cult has to offer something to draw followers. All I can see that Trump gives to my older brother, to the lady at the coffee shop, and the disgruntled voters of America is some kind of validation of their anger, their sense of being disgruntled. But anger itself is exhausting. And I don't really believe that anger is the real root of people's attraction to Trump. I think it's what lies behind their anger, which is fear. White people who are afraid of losing privilege. Evangelicals who are afraid of losing control of society and social norms. I think it's men who are fearful of female autonomy. I think it's poor people who are afraid of losing their chance of becoming like Donald Trump, who by some miracle of circumstances, they might become rich. I think it's low-wage employees who are afraid that illegal immigrants might take their jobs at even lower wages. I've heard Bill Maher say several times that we can hate Donald Trump, but we can't hate all Trump voters. But I'll confess I don't always find myself able to agree with him. I hate racism. I hate misogyny. I hate xenophobia. I hate homophobia. I hate classism. And in effect, isn't that just about the same thing as hating Trump voters? But maybe, just maybe, if we cannot react to them as simply being racist, white-privileged, angry white fascists, and see them as being more pitiably frightened people who need to be made to feel safe in their own homes, who need to be reassured that they are not being replaced by poor immigrants or Jews or the college-educated. Now, it's true enough, they may be being replaced by AI and robots, because even if self-driving taxis sometimes have accidents, you at least don't have to listen to the car giving you some racist screed while you're being driven to the airport. In the end, I just want to say what I have said to you before in years past. Let go of your racism. Set aside your need for guaranteed privilege Embrace immigrants and people of other gender identities and other religions as being your equals. And the best way to do that is to just stop being afraid.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.